So we're talking about the persecution of the Jews and how it really started.
What we call Jews, Bani Israel, were Muslims. And the persecution that the Jews, first of all, we have to acknowledge the reality that the Jews have had a very catastrophically difficult history of persecution. And we then have to acknowledge, first of all, we have to acknowledge that they did have this history. Second of all, we have to acknowledge that that history has had an effect on their psyche collectively, to where they're not joking about feeling vulnerable. They're not joking about feeling that they're in danger and that they live under a sense of existential threat. Obviously, there are, among the Zionists, they've exploited that and they've used that and manipulated that. But that's something that Jews do feel, and not without reason. And then we have to acknowledge that all of these things are true, and we have to acknowledge that the source of the persecution, the origins of the persecution wasn't that the Jews are just sinister and they brought it upon themselves. That's just historically inaccurate. The source of the origin of the persecution of the Jews was tawhid. They were persecuted for being believers. They were persecuted for monotheism and persecuted by polytheists. In those days, they were the mu'mineen, and they were persecuted by kuffar. That's the source, the origin of their history of persecution. And then their deviations from tawhid were largely to fit in, to try to avoid the persecution that they suffered, to try to lighten the burden of the persecution that they suffered, and to try to assimilate with the kuffar around them, to assimilate. And then there's the element of the extent to which they themselves were what we can call colonized psychologically. Brother Torabi talked about that very well in one of our talks, that the Bani Israel, when they were in Egypt, you were there for a long time, and you're a minority, and you are second, third class citizen, slave class, persecuted. And we know also the extent of their persecution, that even when in the story of Musa alayhi salam, when the fight is taking place between the Jew and the Egyptian, the Copt, first of all, the Copt can feel perfectly entitled to violently attack someone from Bani Israel without fear of the law, fear of repercussions. And then when Musa defended and caused the death of the Copt, even though he was raised in Pharaoh's palace, even though he was basically the adopted son of Fir'aun, he was from Bani Israel, and he knew he had no legal protection. If he was actually Fir'aun's son, he could go around killing people as much as he wanted, and it would just all be washed away by the fact that he's from the family of Fir'aun. But the fact that you're Bani Israel, you get no legal rights, even if you were basically a prince, an adopted prince. You have no legal rights. So there's no question that they had this persecution. And when you are in that state, you have to adapt and you have to try to assimilate. You have to try as much as you can to try to get along with people and lessen the extent to which they are persecuting you and trying to, you have to try to conform in some way. Make yourself seem less strange. And this shouldn't be unusual for Muslims to hear. Muslims who live in the West, who bend over backwards to try to fit in and try to lessen the extent of try to lessen the degree to which they seem strange and are regarded as strange, and try to lessen the otherness of Muslims in the West. And this is what the Jews dealt with. This is what they dealt with for centuries. And so, we can blame them, and obviously the deviations are blameworthy, and that's not a matter of opinion, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blamed them. So the deviations are blameworthy, but they also have a context. And the persecution wasn't never based on the deviation. The persecution was based on them adhering to tawhid, The deviation lessened the persecution. And the more they assimilated and deviated, the more they were liked, the less problems they had. And that's deviated from tawhid, deviated from, yeah. You can say the more they assimilated, the less problems they had with the people, and the more problems they had with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the source of this. And we have to be fair in assessing that history, because there's some things about them that this is why the Quran is, like, more than anything else, is full of these stories. It's full of their history. So we should learn from that, because you should be able to relate to some of that. Muslims today in the West especially should be able to relate to some of that.